President Sisi and Macron strengthened strategic partnership and emphasized regional stability. Egyptian-French Business Forum kicks off in Cairo and highlights strengthened economic ties. Egypt rejects Israeli aggression on Gaza and the West Bank and stresses efforts for regional peace. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has reaffirmed that French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Cairo represents a significant milestone in the fruitful bilateral cooperation between the two countries. During a joint press conference, President al-Sisi highlighted the historical relations between Egypt and France, stressing the need to advance cooperation across various sectors. They also agreed on implementing the strategic partnership and reaffirmed Egypt's role as a stabilizing force in the Middle East and the Mediterranean. President al-Sisi emphasized the importance of resolving Palestinian cause for regional stability and discussed the situation in Syria and Lebanon, as well as the importance of supporting Lebanon's new president and government. French President Emmanuel Macron has affirmed Egypt's position as a historic and strategic partner, stressing France's strong commitment to deepening cooperation with Cairo. Speaking at a joint press conference with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi during his official visit, Macron praised Egypt's role in promoting regional peace and stability. He highlighted the two countries' shared vision on Gaza, voicing support for a ceasefire and the resumption of negotiations. Macron also addressed the importance of backing Lebanon, Syria and Sudan, while reaffirming France's support for Egypt's Vision 2030 development goals. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and French President Emmanuel Macron have signed a joint declaration in Cairo, elevating the relations between their countries to a strategic partnership. Among them was a health memorandum aimed at supporting the treatment of Palestinians displaced from Gaza since the outbreak of the war on October 7, 2023. Additionally, the leaders observed the signing of 10 institutional agreements and 12 economic agreements covering sectors like health, transport, water, and renewable energy as part of Business Forum. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and French President Emmanuel Macron have welcomed Jordan's King Abdullah II at the Ittihadiyya Palace in Cairo to discuss regional developments. A trilateral summit is scheduled for later in the day, involving President al-Sisi, Macron, and King Abdullah II, focusing on the situation in Gaza and the West Bank. The summit aims to address immediate ceasefire efforts, humanitarian aid delivery to Gaza, and regional stability. The Egyptian-French Business Forum has kicked off in Cairo with wide participation from officials and representatives of the business community from both countries. Speaking at the opening session of the forum, Mr. Hussein Hiba, the CEO of the General Authority for Investment and Free Zones, said that French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Egypt represents a pivotal milestone in the strategic relations between the two countries, affirming the depth of historical ties and growing cooperation in various fields, particularly the economic ones. Secretary of the Supreme Council of Universities, Dr. Mustafa Rifat, has stated that the French-Egyptian Forum for Scientific and Academic Cooperation will be held over 2 days, April the 7th and the 8th. The Secretary of the Supreme Council of Universities, Dr. Mustafa Rifat, stated that the French-Egyptian Forum for Scientific and Academic Cooperation will be held over 2 days on the sidelines of French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Cairo. The Secretary of the Supreme Council of Universities, Dr. Mustafa Rifat, stated that the French-Egyptian Forum for Scientific and Academic Cooperation will be held on the sidelines of the French president's visit to Cairo, among others. Trade relations between Egypt and France continued to strengthen in 2024, with the total volume of trade reaching $2.9 billion, up from $2.5 billion in 2023. According to CAPMAS data, Egyptian exports to France grew to $1 billion in 2024, up from $855.4 million in 2023. Key sectors driving this increase included electrical machinery, with an amount of $248 million, fertilizers $194 million, fuel $158 million, fruits and vegetables $75 million, and garments $73 million. On the import side, Egypt brought in $1.8 billion from France, slightly up from $1.7 billion in 2023. Key imports were pharmaceuticals $302 million, cereals $183 million, and vehicles $115 million. French investments in Egypt were $483.8 million, and Egyptian investments in France reached $238.3 million. French President Emmanuel Macron has expressed his gratitude to President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and the Egyptian people for their warm welcome. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and French President Emmanuel Macron visited Cairo's historic Khan el-Khalili and Al Hussein districts. Macron's choice of Khan el-Khalili for the visit also emphasized France's distinguished partnership with Egypt, extending beyond formal diplomacy to include humanitarian and cultural ties. Egyptian media footage captured the two leaders touring the districts and the Grand Egyptian Museum, set to open later this year, further showcasing Egypt's rich cultural heritage. For further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Al Ahram Weekly Managing Editor, Mr. Khalid Dawood. Welcome to Qnews. Let me start by asking you what specific outcomes are expected from the trilateral summit of Egypt, Jordan, and France on Gaza.
Well, thanks for having me. Of course, this is a very important visit. At the time, Israel has been escalating its attacks and killing of Palestinians in Gaza, thinking that it would not get any international reaction, and probably with a green light from U.S. President Donald Trump, who's meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today in Washington. So again, this is a message from countries that are on the ground close to Gaza and suffering the consequences of this disastrous war Israel has been launching against the Palestinians in Gaza, and sending a clear message that those countries, as well as a key European nation such as France, is sending to the Israeli side that this war has to come to an end, and also to allow urgently the humanitarian assistance back into Gaza. At the time, now there is renewed warnings from the United Nations and other international agencies of an imminent kind of famine that might be striking Gaza again. After more than 6 weeks of Israel banning all sorts of humanitarian assistance, fuel or electricity from entering Gaza. So hopefully the Israelis will understand this message and start moving on respecting the original ceasefire agreement that was agreed in mid-January and actually mediated by the current U.S. Middle East envoy, Mr. Steve Witkoff. But unfortunately, it seems that both Israel and the United States are now working on a totally new deal in total disregard of what was agreed upon in January, and in total disregard of the Palestinian human lives as we have seen over the past 3 weeks, leading to the death of more than 1,500 Palestinians, including at least 500 children. So this was a very important message coming from Egypt, Jordan, and France to the rest of the world, that this madness has to stop immediately, so that the situation doesn't really get worse, affecting not just the Palestinians in Gaza, but the entire region.
So from what you're saying, what particular message does this visit send to the international community regarding Egypt's role in regional diplomacy?
Well, I mean, Egypt has had a very important and significant role since the war started, the genocide war the Israelis have launched against Palestinians in Gaza on October 8th to 2023. And again, I mean, Egypt's efforts has not been limited to effort to stop the war, but also seeking a wider political settlement that would make sure that those kinds of wars between Israel and Palestinians in Gaza does not get repeated once every few years. And that's why it was important to hear from President Sisi today in the news conference with the French president that Egypt is not only seeking a return to the ceasefire agreement, but also trying to renew the hope and the effort on a long-term political settlement that would not be achieved without agreeing on a two-state solution and the Israeli withdrawal from all occupied Palestinian territories since 1967, including East Jerusalem, and the establishment of a Palestinian state. Those kinds of aims should remain alive. They should not be forgotten. And the world should resist, for sure, the Israeli genocide acts, as well as the declared plans of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said openly a week ago that the Israeli goal is to force Hamas into submission, not just to release the Israeli hostages, but to accept giving up their arms, to leave the leaders of Hamas, to leave the Gaza Strip. And after that, the result would not be ending the war or ending Israel's occupation, but Mr. Netanyahu is saying that he wants to restore Israel's military control over Gaza and then start implementing the so-called Donald Trump plan for the forced displacement of Palestinians, or so-called voluntary displacement by Palestinians who are going to be forced to leave the Gaza Strip, as if this is going to be a long-term solution. As long as Israel continues to deny Palestinian rights, or as long as it continues to deal indifferently with Palestinian human lives, killing them around the clock without any fear of punishment or world reaction, probably Egypt will continue to press Israel to reverse its policies and to recognize the dangers that it's posing to the entire region, even if on the short term Israel might seem like achieving some sort of military successes here or there, but on the long term, only a permanent peace agreement is the only guarantee for stability and peace in the region.
So how can the summit actually contribute to de-escalating the violence in Gaza, and what is the significance of the French, Egyptian and Jordanian leadership coming together at this moment?
I think it was very important to hear from the French president and from the Jordan's King Abdullah that they completely and fully support the Egyptian plan for the reconstruction of Gaza without forcing the displacement of its people. Again, the message is that there are alternatives to the current nightmare scenario in which the Palestinians are going through, and especially after the breach of the ceasefire agreement that was mediated by Egypt, the United States, and Qatar. So again, the Egyptian plan continues to be on the table, and now we cannot only call it an Egyptian plan, but it's a plan that's backed by Arab countries, Islamic countries, and the European nations. Key European nations, including France, Britain, Germany, and Italy, have all supported the Egyptian plan for the reconstruction of Gaza without removing any Palestinians out of their territories. As you know, both Egypt and France are working on a conference to provide much needed help and support for the Palestinian people and the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip as soon as the fighting ends. And it was again, a very important opportunity for President Sisi, Jordan's King Abdullah, and French President Macron to discuss the details of this plan and to press the world community to back this plan and to put it into action. But again, first comes first, and the priority right now is to stop the bloodshed, to bring Israel to recognize the reality that only a ceasefire deal will bring the Israeli hostages back.
Yes. From Cairo, that was Al Ahram Weekly Managing Editor, Mr. Khalid Dawood. Thank you so much for joining us here on Qnews. Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs Badr Abdel Ati has stressed Egypt's total rejection of the Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Abdel Ati spoke on Sunday with the Churches for Peace in the Middle East delegation led by Dr. Ma Elise Cannon. He condemned Israel's actions, stating that they fuel hostility and contradict religious calls for peace. He warned Israeli violations could escalate further, jeopardizing the global peace. The CMEP delegation praised Egypt's efforts in securing a Gaza ceasefire, supporting regional stability and opposing Israel's violations. They also condemned Egypt's Arab recovery plan for Gaza and its peace efforts. A joint statement by Egypt, Jordan and France has called for an immediate return to the ceasefire in Gaza to protect the Palestinians and ensure the prompt and complete delivery of emergency humanitarian aid. The leaders emphasized the importance of safeguarding civilians, humanitarian workers, and ensuring the full delivery of aid as obligations under international law. They also expressed deep concern about the worsening humanitarian situation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, advocating for an end to unilateral actions that hinder a two-state solution. And that brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here is what we have been covering. President Sisi and Macron strengthen strategic partnership and emphasize regional stability. Egyptian-French Business Forum kicks off in Cairo and highlights strengthened economic ties. Egypt rejects Israeli aggression on Gaza and the West Bank and stresses efforts for regional peace. And that's all for now. Remember to stay updated by following Qnews for the latest developments. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Thank you so much for watching.